I'm hoping that our next speaker, the Cisco Senior Vice President Howard Charney, will enlighten not just me, but all of us on what is next in the world of big data, the internet, and computing. Now, Howard is a member of Cisco's Office of the President and Executive Staff, and he reports directly to the CEO, John Chambers. As well as being, in general, a whiz kid, he's also an engineer, patent attorney, a pilot, and an entrepreneur. So he knows this industry very well from pretty much every angle that you can think of. He's overseen the development of key technologies that led directly to the global build-up of the internet. And today he advises governments, universities, and industries on the next big leap in communications capabilities. And that's what he's going to talk to us about today. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Howard Charney.
Thank you. So thank you very much for your invitation to address you. So we're going to talk about how the Internet of Everything changes everything on our planet. And I get to talk to a lot of people around the world. And it is interesting how all of this sort of plays and how it hangs together. Let's start with the big picture for a moment. It is really true. I met Bill Gates at one time, and he is scary smart. Scary smart. But it is true that the Wright brothers created what you might think of as the first worldwide web. And it had this capacity to bring people together, and people who spoke different languages and had different ideas and all different kinds of values, and kind of knit them together. And so Bill Gates was somewhat prescient when he made this observation. Now, it turns out that the world is in this major dislocation. It's not just airlines that are suffering today, or at least challenged today with all kinds of issues. It's true for retail, and it's true for healthcare, and it's very true for government. I speak to a lot of government. It's very true for education, and there's an example that comes up a little later that'll talk a little more about education. Manufacturing and transportation. There is nothing that remains unchanged as we go forward because of connectivity and the Internet of Everything. So let's talk a few moments about technology trends, because this is really important. Basically, everything is mobile these days. I came from a world in which we connected everything together with wires, but that's just not the way we do it anymore. Everything is mobile, and people have their own devices. Everybody carries one of these things, and it's just the way life is. All of our data is in the cloud, and the cloud stands for a number of principles, which is basically infinite storage and infinite computing capacity. And it's elastic. You buy it, and you use it as you need it. And data analytics has to do with all this mathematical and computer computation that tells us things and extracts things from the data that we just did not know were there. And it all has to be done so that your information doesn't get stolen. It's just the way life is today. It also has to be always available. If it's not on, you go crazy. It's just that simple. People expect a personalized experience. They expect it to be for them, not for anybody else. They are willing to pay by the drink. This is very different than it used to be. I mean, we used to sell huge data centers, and the customer would buy this data center from us, and then they would run it. Now they want us to build a data center, charge them nothing. However, they are willing to pay for its usage every time information is accessed, which actually, if you put the numbers to it, could be a very great business model. And there's improvements in man-machine, as we say, interfaces. Sometimes people think that the end of our development is going to be the way that I swipe and I make this thing come alive. You are completely wrong about that. We have not ended the development chain with respect to how the human being and the machine will interface with each other. Now, it turns out that the network is at the center of every great transition that's occurred since about the 90s. And today, we're going to talk about the Internet of Everything. There actually is something that comes after the Internet of Everything. We call it ACI, which stands for application-centric infrastructure, and I don't have time to go over that today, but that is basically super smart infrastructure which understands who you are, what you should get access to, and what would make you happy, so to speak. But let's talk a little more about the Internet of Everything. So the Internet of Everything is basically where you take people, and people get connected somehow, could be by these devices, and you take things, temperature sensors, humidity sensors, pressure sensors, and we take data that we've collected over some period of time, and we put it all together with process, and we make the world a better place therefrom. So it has to do with people to machines, and it has to do with people communicating with other people, and it also has to do with machines talking to other machines. And it's all connected together. It's all connected together. Now, the forecasts tell us that by the year 2050, there will be 50 billion things connected on our planet. 50 billion. Now, we know there won't be 50 billion people on our planet. So what this means is that that's going to be a plethora of things which are not yet connected to the network. And that's going to change life. It's going to change life on airplanes, and it's going to change life all over the place with respect to the information that is collected. 50 billion smart objects. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges for the aviation industry in particular. So it's a really tough business to be in because there are growth and profitability challenges. And as Ed was talking about it, I mean, airlines do make money, but it's a tough business. Competition is really difficult. There's constantly a goal to increase operational excellence. All of our airline customers are constantly trying to wring that last little bit of efficiency out of how they run this process. And of course, it's the right thing to do. And of course, there's the passenger satisfaction issue. Passengers want to be more happy, and they're willing to pay for that. And so it all kind of hangs together with respect to a difficult business model. But, I mean, that is the model that exists, and that's the one that we have to live with. And so there's a number of trends for the aviation industry, and you could read the slide, but there's lots of data that's collected, and the data is put in the cloud, and people are all mobile, and everything's going to get connected together. There are high fuel costs, and meanwhile, not inconsistent with the high fuel costs, governments want us to make the airlines run more green, which seems a little bit difficult, but that's just the way it is. There is a budget airline boom, and you can see there's all kinds of policy decisions that airlines have to run and operate within, which is kind of difficult. And so the fact is that the airlines have a very difficult business. It's very different than my business, but even our business is under a state of siege these days and a state of change, which is very manifest. So let's talk about new insights from data. What can we learn from data? Well, it turns out that 99% of the things on our planet are not yet connected. They're stupid. They don't tell us anything. But that's going to change. But the opportunity is fantastic. And so in the future, over the next decade or so, that 99% of things is going to be connected. Now, it doesn't really matter how many things get connected to the network. It matters what you do with it. That's what's really critical. So we can connect those 99% of the things that are not connected, but we have to do something with that information. Now, it turns out that we collect a lot of data, and it's just a dumb series of ones and zeros. And every now and then we use that data and we transform the data into something called information. And every now and then the information gets worked upon usually with analytics, and it becomes knowledge. And every now and then, that knowledge gets transformed into something that we call wisdom. And wisdom is what modifies human behavior. And so if you can actually go up this pyramid from this silly and useless string of ones and zeros, and you can extract something valuable from it, that's a big step forward. Now, how do we do that? We do that with mathematics. Mathematics and computer scientists, or the buzzword is analytics. Some data is very transient, like an empty seat on an airliner or an ad on Amazon's or somebody's website. That is transient value. It's here for a second and then it's gone. Or a parking space in Barcelona. We call that data in motion. And so data in motion is extremely transient, and we have to act on it immediately, and if you don't act on it immediately, it's gone. Then there's other kinds of information, like, for example, the information collected by the Center for Disease Control. They collect data, and that information has a longer lifespan, so that you might call big data. And it all comes under the rubric, if you will, of this huge string of ones and zeros that we would like to transform into wisdom. Now, here's an interesting example, and you might say, why is he using an example from Arizona State University? This is an airline passenger experience and in-flight entertainment forum. Arizona State University has the best implementation of the use of big data as that big data is utilized to predict human behavior. The best. It's really quite amazing. So ASU uses dashboards to measure everything. They happen to be the largest university in the United States. And they use predictive analytics and have improved freshman retention rates almost 7%. And ASU online enrollments have gone up a lot between, well, you can see the numbers. So they basically measure everything. And what they use this information to do is to predict what's going to happen at the university. And so, the one that I find most amazing is the early warning retention tool. They now know everybody has these badges, right? Every student, every professor, everybody who's on the university campus has these badges. So they know when a student goes into the cafeteria. They know what they purchased for dinner. They know when they go in the library. They know when they use the health center. They know when they go to the counseling center. They know when they're in class. They know about the student. And what they've done is they've superimposed upon this predictive analytics to be able to determine who is at risk of failing 1 semester to 2 semesters prior to them actually failing. Do you understand how valuable this is? This is amazing. There's something to be learned about what these people have done with big data and analytics that you should not overlook. It's amazing. And they're happy to talk to you about it, incidentally. And so there's game-changing sensor technology. Of course, we use sensors to measure the wear that occurs to jet engine parts, and use sensors for aircraft maintenance. We use smartwatches and our phones to get onto the airplane as a proxy for a boarding pass. And I thought this one was really cool. I think that's from British Airways. Sensors that tell you if you're happy or not by the color of your blanket. Or blankie, if you like that. I think that's really amazing. So in this world of tomorrow in which everything is connected and everything is measured, these are just some early examples. So what's it going to take to be successful? Well, the world's a really complicated place. And one of the aspects of things that are of the world which is complicated is that people have data and they don't want to share it. It's really horrible. When I talk to government, you find that the Department of Agriculture has all this data on crops and infestations, but they don't want to share it with anybody. The state police have all this data on human movements, but they don't want to share it with anybody. And that's the same thing is true in the airlines. You collect lots of data, but you don't want to share it with anybody. Now, that's a problem, and it makes for great increased complexity. And it's very difficult for us to unlock the intelligence that's in the data when the data is very siloed. And of course, we have to do this at all times by keeping this secure, or else nobody's going to ever share their information. So there's this convergence, if you will, you can think of it, of all these technological advances. And they're all based upon mobility, and they're all based upon wireless, and they're all based upon sharing of information between multiple sources. And if you do it right, it changes the passenger experience. And if you do it right, it changes the profitability model. And if you do it right, customers are happier. And if customers are happier, this gets to be a better world. So we coined this term called fast IT. And so fast IT is simple. We try to make the deployment of these systems as straightforward as possible. It has to be smart. It has to be able to learn real time and then adjust what it's doing based upon the needs that are placed upon it. And of course, at all times, it has to be secure. It just doesn't work if it can be hacked into. Now, there actually is a technological model for how this works, and I'm not going to bore you with this model. Basically, you have physical infrastructure, and the physical infrastructure are all those sensors and all the ways that information gets collected, and then at the top there are applications which provide services, catering services, or all kinds of different services, and in the middle, you can think of it as a lot of software. So there is a model for how this works. It's complicated, but one of the things that we try to do is we try to hide the complexity from the customer. The complexity is really scary sometimes, but so what? If we do a good job, the customer for sure will never see this, but that's really what's at the heart of how you pull this off. So let's look ahead, because we're supposed to do that. We're supposed to ask the question, what comes tomorrow? So I know that we're only a few miles from Hollywood. You see, I come from Silicon Valley. I don't come from this place. And robots that have human instantiation are a little scary to me. But it's possible that you could have automated trash collecting robots that would patrol the aisles during flights. I just don't think that they're going to look like that. But so what? It's the concept of automation is probably valid. The concept of human instantiation is probably not so valid. I can tell you there's lots of robots on Ford's assembly line in Dearborn, Michigan, but none of them look like that. None of them. And it's very likely that we will have sensors that will monitor trash levels in waste compactors, because one of the things they've learned, not just for airlines, but they've learned this in smart cities, is that it's very expensive to empty trash containers if they're not full. And you should only empty the ones that are full. And we need to know when the ones that are full are in fact full. So we've learned this in Barcelona, and we've learned this in some other cities, that you can save a lot of money. You can improve operational excellence if you know the status of the systems as you're using, and in this case, trash collection. And it's also true that it's really bad when customers, airline customers in particular, get sick. So you can use biological sensors to monitor the contamination levels in food and water. It's really not that complicated. We just have to implement those systems to do that. This is an interesting one. So this is actually a real example. This occurred on Iberia Airlines, and those people on the left are wearing Google Glass. And what they were doing was, Iberia was transporting the Spanish soccer or football team to South America for the World Cup. And so they recorded this whole thing using Google Glass, and then they put it up on YouTube. It's very cool. But the Europeans would have a big problem with this if we did this globally, because the EU is extremely sensitive to privacy concerns, and Google Glass basically destroys or sets to naught the notion that you have any anonymity. You have no anonymity anymore. And so the world is in this state of transition where we have this capacity to record tremendous amounts of information and then send it out over the network to be stored, but you may not want us to collect that information and send it out over the network to be stored. So this one is a little bit delicate, but this was a real example that was done. And so it's very likely in the future we will have technology like this. It's just a matter of how will it be deployed and live within the sensitivities and the sensibilities, if you will, of those that are very concerned with privacy and security. And this is a real life example too. This is called epidermal electronics. And epidermal electronics is the beginning of a wave. This particular example comes from the University of California at San Diego, just a few miles south of where we are right now. And so the future for us holds these body sensors. Sensors which are thin and flexible and make real-time measurements of us. And it's all for the good. It'll tell me what my blood sugar levels are. It'll tell me what my blood pressure is. It'll tell me what my temperature is. And you can imagine that these sensors will communicate wirelessly, not just with my smartphone, but they could communicate wirelessly with other devices. And so the world of tomorrow is not just about humans which come through our systems. The world of tomorrow is about humans which are instrumented. Now again, this has privacy and security concerns, but if you can see past the privacy and the security concerns, you can see that there's a world of tomorrow where people are not just carrying smartphones, they are actually instrumented. And if you knew what their status was, you might be able to provide them with an enhanced passenger experience. Again, all for the good, not necessarily not necessarily to malign or for any negative purpose, but all for the positive. So let's talk a little more about waves of opportunity. This particular quote comes out of the MIT Technology Review. And I need to leave you with a few thoughts. And one of those thoughts is that we simply do not understand, and we always underestimate how valuable a technology is. We just don't get it in the beginning. And then what happens later is the knee of the curve, we sometimes call it the hockey stick, surprises everyone. And that's basically the way it was with smartphones, and that's basically the way it was with networks, and that's basically the way it was with almost everything that's changed life on our planet. So the benefits of any truly transformative technology are always exaggerated in the beginning because we don't understand, but then they take off. You should also appreciate what Aldous Huxley said, nobody's going to say thank you. Everything is taken for granted. Every time we make an advancement, it sort of becomes the status quo. And then once it becomes a status quo, nobody says thank you. They just take it for granted. But that's sort of the way our lives have to be. And then we have something called Metcalfes Law. So Bob Metcalfe, was a fraternity brother of mine at MIT. And I didn't know that he was going to create a law. It's true. So Metcalfe created this law, and the law says that the value of a communications infrastructure goes as the square of the number of nodes connected to the infrastructure. You got that? The value goes as the square of the number of nodes connected. Now, people have argued whether Metcalfe's law is really correct or not, or whether the predictions are too ebullient. That's okay, and there's been all kinds of articles about this, but the fact of the matter is that we do know that one fax machine is useless, and 2 fax machines are really not very valuable, but 10 million fax machines are very valuable. And so what's going to happen if we do connect 50 billion sensors by 2020, and then this all gets played off against data and analytics, is that there's going to be tremendous amounts of improvement to the quality of our lives on Earth. Now, I'm sure that there'll be some downsides to this, but in general, there's going to be this intelligence, and there's going to be a convergence, and it's all going to be done securely. And it's going to be an exponential improvement to the quality of life on our planet, and not just on airlines. So let me end with a comment about the passenger experience. Because the passenger experience is not just about the airline, it happens also to be about the airport. Because these people come to the airport and then they have this experience, and then they get on this airplane and they go someplace. Well, I was recently in Copenhagen, and it turns out that Copenhagen's amazing. It's also, of course, we know from third-party studies that Denmark is the happiest country on the planet, the happiest. But the Copenhagen airport is also forecasting about a 40 to 50% increase in their passenger traffic year on year. 40 to 50%. It's amazing. And And it's not that big an airport, but it's going to become that. And what are they doing at the Copenhagen airport? They're using Google Glass, for example, to greet travelers, because in an airport you really don't have an expectation of very much privacy because you're inside their secure area anyway. So greeters use Google Glass. They use location analytics to collect information on the traffic patterns and on where people stop and look in the shops. And then they have this wayfinding app that displays a trip overview. So I'm going to end this talk with a video. Now the video was shot in Denmark. And guess what? It's in Danish. Anybody speak Danish? Oh, so you can listen and actually know what they're saying. But when I saw it, it was useless. I go, what is this about? So what we did was we put English subtitles to the video, and it's such a fantastic story that we decided to spend the money to do it, and I'll leave you with the Copenhagen airport. Let's run the video.
Det har været utrolig spændende. I og med, at det har været så nyt, så har der været mange udfordringer, men det har jo så til gengæld betydet, at vi har fået utrolig godt samarbejde med både leverandøren, netdesign og med producenten Cisco.
Københavns Lufthavn er jo Nordeuropas største lufthavn med 24 millioner passagerer om året. Størrelsesmæssigt på størrelse med Frederiksberg Kommune. Vi har 250.000 operationer om året. Det betyder fly, der letter eller afgår fra lufthavnen. Visionerne var jo, at vi først og fremmest gerne ville have styr på alle de stykker udstyr, vi skal bruge i dagligdagen, alle vores assets. Når vi ikke rigtig kan finde tingene, når vi skal bruge dem, så har det jo den uheldige konsekvens, at vi kan faktisk komme til at forsinke nogle fly. Udover det, så vil vi frygtelig gerne vide, hvilken vej gennem lufthavnen vores passagerer typisk tager, når de er herude. Og endelig så kunne vi også godt tænke os at tilvejebringe nogle flere services til vores passagerer.
En enhed, som du vil tracke, for eksempel en smartphone, den sender et broadcastet signal ud. Og det bliver så opfanget af access points rundt om i terminalen. Og afhængig af signalstyrken vil man kunne triangulere og finde ud af, hvor den enhed er. Løsningen består af utrolig mange access points. Når man skal lave location-based analytics, så kræver det rigtig mange access points. Så vi har omkring 900 access points oppe nu. Derudover så har vi 3 5508-controller, som der er redundant forbundet. Og til at lave lokationsberegningen, der bruger vi MSC. Så dem har vi også 2 af.
Vi har faktisk opnået rigtig mange fordele. De 3 væsentligste, jeg kan nævne, det er, at vi har styr på alle de her assets, som jeg talte om. Vi har overfor passagererne har vi en spændende wayfinding-applikation.
Og så kan man blive vist hen til det sted, som man søger. Vi bruger noget, der hedder points of interest. Det vil sige, at du søger efter for eksempel en tøjbutik og trykker den ind på telefonen, og så vil du blive vist i den retning af tøjbutikken ud fra, hvor du er.
Eller til deres gate, når de skal ud og flyve. Så wayfinding-delen har selvfølgelig også været en ret interessant del af det her af visionen. Og den er nu bare bygget ind i vores CPH-app, som man kan downloade til sin smartphone, uanset hvilket fabrikat man har. Det, at vi jo kan se folks position fra de træder ind i lufthavnen, til de er ude i et fly på et eller andet tidspunkt, det gør jo også, at vi har et fantastisk godt datagrundlag på den stream af passagerer, der ligesom er igennem vores lufthavn.
Før i tiden, der fulgte man efter passagerer for at finde ud af, hvordan de reagerede. Hvormed nu, der følger man folks telefoner, det vil sige, det er anonym data, men du kan se trenden, hvordan bevæger folk sig, hvor lang tid er det i de forskellige områder.
Den sidste del af visionen var jo, at vi meget gerne ville være sikre på alt det udstyr, som vi har i lufthavnen, som jo er rigtig, rigtig meget udstyr. Vi har jo rengøringsudstyr, vi har værktøj, vi har maskiner, vi har alle mulige stykker udstyr, som egentlig kan blive væk, fordi folk ikke lige husker, hvor de har stillet det sidste gang. Og der har vi simpelthen valgt at sætte sådan en lille radiosender på en masse stykker udstyr. Den sender så nogle små signaler ud til vores trådløse netværk, og Og når den gør det, så ved vi konstant, hvor den befinder sig. Så er det bare lige at slå op på en skærm, og så kan vi se, hvor den her støvsuger eller den her maskine, den står henne til hver en tid. En af planerne er jo, at vi med den her løsning sikrer, at vores passagerer ikke forsinker vores fly. Så hvis vi kan se, at en given passager måske står så langt væk fra den gate, som han rent faktisk skal boarde sit fly i, jamen så har vi tænkt os at sende en pushbesked, der siger, at nu er du lige ved at skulle afsted for overhovedet at kunne nå frem til flyafgangen. Så vær venlig at gå derhen hurtigst muligt. Ikke?
Vi var den første lufthavn i verden, som der lavede location awareness. Så det har været utroligt spændende, men det har også forårsaget mange udfordringer. Og det har så gjort, at vi har fået et utroligt godt samarbejde med både NetDesign og Cisco, og løbende holder statusmøder om, hvordan vi kan forbedre vores teknologi og vores løsning.
Well, that really is Big Brother, isn't it? What would George Orwell have made of it? Albeit a very benevolent Big Brother there at Copenhagen. Howard, thank you so much for that tour de horizon and that video.
You're welcome. Do you want me to take any questions?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Yes, please.
fine.
Yes, please. It was great, from the blankets that follow your mood to the robots that collect trash. Now, we have time for some questions from the audience. So please, we have a question over there from that gentleman. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. There we go. So you talked a lot about the whole internet and everything and how we're connecting stuff, but I didn't hear anything about iBeacon and where the current technologies are right now. So I saw the video and I see that's one way of doing it, and I've seen with Japan Airlines, for example, they're using iBeacons and smartwatches. Where do you see the current technology as it is? Is that where it's going, or is it going more the route with wireless and the stuff that Cisco's doing?
So the technology is taking as many diversions as there are human beings that are creative. And so some implementations are Wi-Fi based, and some implementations are smartphone and LTE based, and some use very creative applications, and it's yet to be seen where the dominance occurs insofar as what's the best implementation. I kind of like it because it's all over the place. And it's sort of an evidence of human creativity as to how these things are getting implemented. And so when you say, how do we see it all over the place. And it's just based on, and there will be standards that will become enacted. And so at some point in time, people will decide that there's too many platforms and there's too many ways that things are communicating with each other, and it's costing us more money than it's saving us. We need to go to some standards making body and agree that this is how we are going to make these communications infrastructure platforms work. So the answer to your question is basically, it's all over the place.
Very honest. Any more questions for honest Howard? Sir, at the front. There's a microphone will magically wing its way to you because it's got your locator device. Actually, it doesn't need to use technology. Lauren is able to use the eyeball, that very old-fashioned.
And we know who you are. We know how many digits are in your tax return.
And if
we
you're
know how
wearing-
many
yeah.
children you have.
Whether you've paid your taxes.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah.
Being a child of the 60s, I find that frightening. You know, I love predictive analysis, but I think it's a little ingenuous to say that we're in a secure or non-hackable environment. And what is Cisco doing to really ensure that part of the privatization of somebody?
So that's a very good question. So we have very big customers called the CIA and NSA and the military in many different countries. And most of the problems that occur are when we design systems and the customer says it's too costly, we don't want to do that. And when it's too costly and we don't want to do that, that usually leaves places where hackers get in. There's an article this morning in the USA Today about Home Depot. Yet another example of credit card and personal information being stolen. I guarantee you that a post-mortem analysis of that system will show that it was an accident waiting to happen. It wasn't rocket science. So when you say, what are we doing? I say, okay, if you ask us, genuinely ask us to design a system, incidentally, it's impossible to make it so it can't be hacked. It's just a matter of how big a computer, how many variations are going to have to be inspected to get through the walls. And then there's multiple levels. But if you say to us, what would a system be like which is totally secure, we can design it. And then what it's going to end up being is a trade-off between how much you want to spend and the security that you just purchased. And it's just that simple. And we've designed systems for NSA. And they say, okay, it works for us. And so we just need to sit down and understand what the needs are of the data that you want to collect and what do you want to do with it and who do you want to keep out. And then we can allow that to become a reality. It's that simple. And then the question will be, how much do you want to pay? But I'm not being unkind about it. It's the way life works.
Very interesting answer. Now, any more questions for Howard? A lady at the back there. Microphone will make its way to you. But of course, it is fascinating, that trade-off between technology and privacy, because the more information that's available, the more information that needs to be protected. So how much of your time are you spending building systems? Madam.
Hello, Lori Salazar from Thales. I'm interested in the future and the discussion you had on body sensors. What would be probably the biggest challenge with getting body sensors as part of the human body, the biggest challenge? And then could artificial intelligence in terms of emulating medicine and doctors, analytics, et cetera, could that be taken to another level? Or even the human being itself being able to determine, their own medical condition?
So the biggest challenge is just getting people comfortable with the deployment of these kinds of sensors. So I know that this is about airline experience and about the delivery of entertainment and food, et cetera, but we have huge customers in the healthcare industry, and where they are taking the world is toward sensor technology where the human body is measured both by putting on, say, a jacket, which takes sensory measurements of almost everything going on in your body, or like the epidermal electronics that I showed from UC San Diego. So there's this leap that's going to occur with respect to information which is collected about you, which is batched. It's taken on an infrequent basis. I measure my blood sugar level, but I only do it once a day. But imagine if it was measured continuously all the time, 24 hours a day. That would be really valuable, because I'm a diabetic. This is a good thing. And so the answer to your question is we have to get people used to the continuous collection of information. And that becomes the biggest challenge. And because the sensors will be benign, you won't even know they're there. They're just going to collect this information. And then it becomes the development of the analytics, that becomes the issue, and the monitoring, and how do we collect the information, and how do we ensure the security of that information so that you're okay with this. Because if you're not okay with it, then this isn't going to work. But I'll tell you that United Healthcare and Cigna and the other healthcare providers in the EU, they are all working on this, because the name of the game is how do we increase wellness so that we spend less money on restoration. Restoration is really expensive. New joints are really expensive. New hearts are really expensive. But if we know in advance that you're about to suffer some kind of an event, this is really, really valuable, and then their net costs go down. So what this is about is an increase in wellness and an increase in well-being and an increase in happiness and an increase in customer satisfaction, but it's going to take time. And that's okay, because that's the way life works. It's just going to take some time.
All right, we have time for one more question for Howard, if you don't mind taking one more. Anybody got one question out there? Sir, over there. The microphone will come towards you. Yes, it's all very interesting. I'm a bit worried about the blanket. Would the blanket allow you to have a switch so you could turn it off, so you didn't want people to know that you were nervous about turbulence?
You're going to have to contact British Airways about that. I don't know if you can turn it off.
Otherwise, it could create a lot of work for the stewards and stewardesses.
Maybe.
Sir, your question.
Right. Yeah, Garen Moreno from BMW DesignWorks. We talk about infrastructure, analytics. You mentioned the issue of security, and you mentioned the idea of nodes, but what you haven't talked about are the transitions. See, it's our business is so, or airline industry, it's siloed, right? So in this example here, you have one airport. But in terms of ownership, from passing from place to place, as an airline wanting to control more of the actual passenger journey from their car to the parking, etc., how does Cisco, or do you have any recommendations on how we approach the ownership and the transition of that data from one to the other?
So you need to take a holistic approach to this. In other words, we know that human beings are inclined to siloed behavior. That's mine, and I don't share it with you. That's the way we behave. But when we get an engagement and we get a large infrastructure or a large government or an airline, we try to take a holistic approach, and we start to ask the question, okay, what do you want to achieve by this engagement? What are you trying to do? And they say, well, you know, we want a higher passenger flow, or we want a higher customer satisfaction. Okay, how do you know that that's the case? How will you measure it? And then we begin to break apart who has the data and who is being selfish with the data. And if you get high enough up in the organization, you can break those silos. If you go down in the organization, you can't break them. They're so solidly entrenched. But if you get to the office of the CFO or the CEO or the COO, what you find is you can break the silos, because they actually have the interests of the shareholders in their hands. And they know we have to get to share all this information. So holistically, we have a passenger or we have a patient, and they're moving through the system in this way, and they're going to touch these databases. And as they touch all these databases, we should know that. And we should be able to attach some figure of merit to the fact that they passed through here. And was the experience positive or not positive? And so when we do this, we try to not do it as a siloed proposal. We try to do this as a large entity proposal, and then you break through these individual areas where it's so held close to the vest. I don't know how to say it any other way. And you have to get very high in the organization to do it, or else you just can't get past that I own it, it's mine, don't ask me for it.
Howard Charney of Cisco, thank you very much indeed for answering those questions and for that futuristic
Thank you.
presentation.